Welcome back, everybody, to the You Ask We podcast, the show where you ask the questions, they answer them, and I'm just the guy in the middle. And this week, we have an amazing episode for y'all. He's a designer, engineer, and entrepreneur with a passion for building teams, products, and reimagining the way people connect. He co-founded Silks, which is a startup revolutionizing fantasy sports for thoroughbred horse racing, where he built the creative studio and oversaw the product and engineering roadmap. And he also founded Evolv Shorts, a streetwear brand that mirrors the nostalgia of iconic sneakers in basketball. I want to give a warm welcome today to my man, Binny Plotkin. Binny, how's it going, bro?
Thank God, going well. It's awesome to be on here. I love what you've been doing.
Yeah, man, it's awesome to have you here. So, as you know, the way the show works is pretty much we have a bunch of people that come on Instagram and submit questions for the show that we're going to tackle today. But the way the show works is I always ask the first question, and that's what's new, you know?
Yeah. So these days I'm back in Miami. So I was traveling a little bit, but I'm back here now, and I'm on the early phases of founding my next venture, Post Silks. So going through these early motions of kind of building the MVP and creating a compelling story that I'll then go and fundraise around and build a team around. So that's what I've been up to.
So so Post Silks is like a new product, but it's connected to the Silks like brand.
No, so this is completely separate. It's
Oh
kind of my
wow.
next venture post Silks, and it has to do with, I think, a really exciting kind of next phase of the internet, next phase of storytelling in particular, and it's on the intersection, if you will, of AI and machine learning, um, but also kind of with I think, a touch on brands and IP in a way that I think people and communities could continue to build on top of the stories that they love. So that's what I've been doing. I'm an advisor currently for Silks, co-founded the business like 2 years ago. And it's been the wildest roller coaster you could have ever imagined, just from a startup life perspective, but also from being in the wild west of Web3 and crypto. And yeah, it's a blessing, going through the experience and building a team and getting to market. And yeah, it's exciting kind of where Silks is at next. We actually just finished raising another round of funding. So we're at the next phase of growth for the business as a whole. And for me, when I joined Silks like 2 years ago, right out of college, I co-founded with two other guys, Dan Nisanoff and Troy Levy, and they're established entrepreneurs. And it was an opportunity for me to kind of go through the motions of building a company. But the ultimate goal was for me to then go off and found my own that I think I'd have, more, I'd say, ownership of to really build and scale. So yeah, thank God things are going well, both from the Silks perspective and then early phases here in this next venture that's going.
Awesome. So now we can get into these questions that people submitted. And this first one comes from Nate, because correct me if I'm wrong, I kind of described Silks as an NFT horse racing company. And then Nate pretty much asked, what is that? So if you want to talk for a second, like how
Yeah.
it works, like
So I know we're both fantasy guys, you know what I mean? And I love fantasy sports. I've always played fantasy sports. And I think the question that we asked ourselves at Silks is, what does the future of fantasy sports even look like? And you look at traditional ownership of a franchise or a team, and you're like, wow, the dream is to actually own the team, right? I could play in my own fantasy league with 10 friends and own one team within the 10, but there are thousands of fantasy leagues. And the really interesting thing about blockchain that I love is it's kind of reimagines what ownership on the internet looks like. And then you take that and you pair that with fantasy and you ask yourself, what if we could create one global fantasy league? So instead of there being thousands of Tom Brady's across thousands of leagues, there's only one league globally and there's only one Tom Brady. But we did this for horse racing in particular. Troy was one of the co-founders, owns a real horse racing company. And we saw early validation in the market with kind of pre-existing, I'd say, algorithmic horse racing games, that there was a market for people within the blockchain space for horse racing. And then obviously, kind of taking the real world aspect with fantasy, we brought it to life in a way where anyone can own a real racehorse to our game. It's completely separate from the real racehorse, meaning we create a secondary layer under the real economy. And basically everything that the real owner would get, we give you. So if the real owner's horse makes $1,000 racing, we right now at Silks, we pay out 1% of the prize reward. So you'll make, 1% of that. We've actually already paid out, $250,000 in prizes over the past couple months. And essentially, you as an owner in our game, when that horse hits the track in the real world, whether it comes in first, second, third, or fourth, you get paid. And then if that horse goes on to become a broodmare or a sire, a mother or father, you get paid as well. So all the economics of ownership are directly mirrored in our ecosystem. You have the liquidity, you have the ability to buy and sell on a secondary market, the horses that you own. And then we enhance the ownership through visual storytelling, which is where the creative aspect comes in, where you have a farm, you have horses, you have an identity, and it kind of amplifies that feeling of being an owner.
Well, so it's all virtual pretty much? Like
It's all virtual, but we have partnered with NYRA, the New York Racing Association, which owns all the big racetracks in New York. And we've also have a pretty amazing agreement with the Jockey Club. So all of the real world horse racing data comes directly to us. But the cool thing about that is you can go to the racetrack and watch your horse race, right? Even though it's virtual, there's that real world aspect where all of a sudden you're on the track, you're watching the horse that you own in our game run, and you have that really cool relationship. And the cool thing is that the real industry really appreciates it because all of a sudden you're starting to build fandom around a racehorse. So if you're the real racehorse owner, you love the fact that people are coming out to the track to root on your horse and have a vested interest in terms of the results of that race. So yeah, it's all virtual, but the physical aspect helps bring it to life even more.
Okay, I see. Because like I think that's what confuses me because I really don't know much about NFTs like as a whole. I think that part confuses me because it's like basically it's like fantasy sports, but it's fantasy horse racing basically. And they own like the virtual copy of a real life horse. So they're rooting for that horse to do well in real life, so they win like that week in fantasy basically.
And the only reason why blockchain is necessary is because in our fantasy league, for example, if I want to go and create a trade or I want to go pick up a player off of waivers, it's tied to our league. The beautiful thing about the blockchain is you create a global marketplace. So there's multiple block marketplaces on the internet that are all powered by the blockchain. And I could take my horse that I own in Silks and list it for sale across any of them. So it's not like it's limited to, our waiver or our trade deadlines, whatever it is. You have a massive open market where you as the owner of a horse have liquidity, have the ability to literally list it and sell it to anybody in the world without the limits of a confined league. And the blockchain creates a global access layer across the internet that makes all that possible. So yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting. So it's basically it's fantasy sports versus the world. Like
yeah, it's like imagine if it's basically like there's no difference between you and the real racehorse owner if you just close your eyes and you lived in a virtual world. So it's like there's the real world and then there's the Silks world. But like you're the owner in Silks and you watch that horse run in the real world or on TV, and we pay you what our economy pays.
that is unreal. That's really cool. I mean, honestly, has there ever been like a fantasy horse racing like league like before Silks? Like, has anyone done fantasy horse racing before that?
Yeah, so there's been a couple attempts to kind of create fantasy for horse racing. The thing is that there's a couple actual difficulties with creating traditional fantasy for horse racing. As opposed to like fantasy football or basketball, you have seasonal structures that allows you to like have scores and things like that on a weekly basis. And then you create like league rankings and leaderboards. Horse racing is not structured like that. So what we're doing is we're basically just mirroring the real economy, right? So if you're going to own a real racehorse in the real world, there's no difference between ours. And when you play fantasy sports, you only own Tom Brady for that one season, and then you got to redraft the next year. When you buy a Silks horse, that horse is born in 2021, whatever it is, you own it for its entire life. It's not like you redraft, you own it. So 5 years from now, it's made you X amount of dollars, and you're like, you know what, I want to sell it to somebody else. You can just sell it to somebody else. So it's like for a lifetime,
It's really cool. It's awesome. And this next question actually comes from Kyle, and he's actually kind of curious because like what made you come up with this idea specifically? Like fantasy virtual horse racing, like NFT horse racing. What made you come up with that idea? Like what was the inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so 2 years ago was I met with Dan Nisanoff in Boca. I was graduating and I had my own business in college, and I was super fascinated by blockchain. And I was working on creating an integration on Shopify that would allow anybody, when they go to check out, to essentially virtualize their physical good. And then they'd have like an NFT of the thing they just bought on the website. And there's a lot of reasons why that's really interesting. One, a business could upcharge, kind of the checkout process and create an additional amenity to what you're buying. But then ultimately, the business now has an opportunity to create more value for what you own over time. And that was like a really interesting use case for how you could take a physical good, mirror it with a virtual asset, and then tie those two together. So all of a sudden, there's additional benefits on the internet that the NFT could give you. I met Dan just to talk with him because he's a very established entrepreneur. This is like his fourth or fifth venture. He's sold a couple in the past. Just to give me kind of like, kind of advice or feedback. And the last business he sold, he actually sold to the NFL. And it was a really interesting take on creating global fantasy leagues that are on the blockchain. So like imagine you have a league with your friends. You could basically invest in specific fantasy teams that are globally being owned. And it was like that version of fantasy sports. Dan met with Troy, and Troy had the horse racing side, and they were like, let's bring this to life. And I met with them. I just went in for like a conversation to talk about kind of what I was doing. And he said, why don't you join us? And, you'll really have an opportunity as a young entrepreneur to go through those early motions, learn fast, and and go through the business cycle of a startup. So I joined them, and it was all from there. So yeah.
So it started as seeking advice, and then it became a partnership, pretty much.
Yeah, and then I joined as a co-founder. My responsibilities were very much oriented on the product side. So how do you take, I'd say, fantasy, which could be very, very much like, here's a picture of the real horse and here's how you own it. But with this emerging space of the blockchain, there's a lot of really compelling stories of what the future of the internet looks like. And a strong story could help attract new users, could help attract capital, could help us raise money, and could help us go to market. So I came in to really support from the storytelling perspective of building a metaverse, right, or virtual reality where you live and own these racehorses. So that kind of resulted in me building out our 3D studio, creative team, animators, game developers, all of that. And then, as you go through those progressions, we were able to go to market, sell a bunch of our assets, and then raise more money. So just going through those motions, building a team, and then getting the product to market. And now for the past, I think, 8 or 9 months, we've already had horses racing and earning money. And today you could go buy a racehorse on Silks, go to the track, watch a race, watch it on TV, and get paid minutes later in our game. So it's a very, very exciting experience being able to take an idea and bring it to life. And Silks has been able to do that. And now it's at its next phase of growth, which is really oriented on, user acquisition as a startup, being able to just adopt more users and get to a point where, you kind of hockey stick, if you will, is kind of where the focus is.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, shout out Dan Nisanoff, first off, shout out to the boy. And secondly, I mean, I totally get it because like you said something about how stories sell. And it's so true because it's like everyone wants to see a story, everyone wants to see a good one. And honestly, I feel like that's the reason I bring people like you on this podcast because everyone has such an interesting story. Like everyone has something, and that's what gets views, that's what gets people interested. And it's cool you notice that and like you're able to find success out of that. So that's great, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say, noise around Web3 and NFTs. And it's like, what is this? What is that? And it's because there was a lot of different stories that were being told. And I think when there's a new emerging technology, there could be a lot of great stories, but then there could also be a lot of opportunities for people to potentially scam others, you know what I mean, or not fulfill their end of the bargain when it comes to the actual implementation of that story. So what we're seeing now, I think, is the next cycle of these businesses that have been building this technology, but actually are able to create real utility, real value as a result of it. But it's a very, very exciting space because there are a lot of really compelling use cases and stories that are being told.
Yeah, but honestly, end of the day, people do have to be careful because there are a lot of scammers there. Shout out Logan Paul. Uh, But yeah, so people just got to be careful. But this next question actually comes from Mitch, our good friend Mitch, back in LA. What's up?
My
Um,
boy.
so his question is why stop at horse racing? Like, because it was cool that you made like a global fantasy like horse racing thing, but why'd you stop at like horse racing specifically? Like, did you not want to venture into other sports or anything like that?
So I think there's a different kind of phases in the startup life cycle, the business life cycle. And at first you got to figure out the niche, you know what I mean? Or like the main area that you want to become really, really good at and then scale from there. And I think the biggest thing is to validate, um, product market fit. Why is our idea actually going to be successful in the long term? Do people actually want what we're building? And then as you find, kind of green check marks along the way, you figure out how to scale that in other use cases and implementations. I think for us at first, it's horse racing. More particularly, it's horse racing in the US. And then ultimately it'll scale to global horse racing. We have every single racetrack, all the horses across the entire world. And then potentially if you see, really good um, adoption around a global league, you could then look at opportunities to scale to other fantasy or sports as well. But the focus right now, we've been in the market for 2 years, but it's still a very young business, is to continue to validate and iterate around what works and what the users like.
Hmm. You know, honestly, I'd have an idea for you like after you guys finish expanding completely into the horse racing world, fantasy dog competitions.
Oh, they have crazy dog races, by the way. Like these
Yeah.
greyhounds are
Like
insane.
like like the one with the little like the track like where they like zigzag like through the poles and stuff like that. Like just
Yeah.
that.
Wild.
You'll have a bunch of grown men like screaming at their TV like "Go Buttercup!" Like it's great. No, but it's awesome. I mean, it's like it's a slow growth, but it's like as long as like the growth mindset is there, like that's all that matters, and that's awesome. Yeah. So this question comes from Ariella, and I know that we said now that it's like because like we've kind of understood that it's connected to the real world and like the races of the real world, but she's kind of curious like is there any chance that these races or these games or like people can like rig the system? Is there like any chance of that? And if so, like
Yeah, I think it's like based on the real world, right? So if someone's kind of giving their horse steroids or like cheating in any way whatsoever in the real world, that will like impact our game. And there have been times with like not recently, but there are times where things like that happen, and then the prize rewards that a real world owner got gets revoked, and they don't earn the money. And that will cycle through into our game as well, depending on specific circumstances. If such a thing were to happen, right? But we can't prevent real world circumstances from happening in that regard. So yeah, it's really just like real world, and we're here for it.
yeah, so it's like I'm actually kind of curious now because it's like I mean, if a real world horse tests positive for steroids or something, and like the real world rewards are revoked, right? Like what happens to the fantasy awards, like to the Silks rewards? Because on one end, the virtual owner didn't do anything, so it's not his fault at all. But on the other hand, like this horse is on steroids, so it is kind of an unfair advantage. So like, what like do you do to like kind of keep things even?
So yeah, so we can't change with the real world, what's happening in the real world. You know what I mean? The real industry has to keep people accountable and ensure that the game itself is actually even. And we are just a derivative of the real economy. So whatever happens in the real world, we kind of maintain the same. And we think it's really important to create that balance and not to create additional, I'd say, gamified aspects on top of it that kind of pull away from feeling like a real world owner. So the same frustrations, the same, feeling that it might be the real horse owner in the real world, we want to replicate that in the same way. You know what I mean? Like we really want to make it feel like there's no difference between being a real world owner or a Silks owner, um, in a way where other fantasy sports or I'd say fantasy games as a whole could ever do that for someone.
Yeah, and that's fair enough, honestly. And you guys are doing the best you could, I bet. So it's all good at the end of the day. This next question comes from David. Um, His question is phrased like this. I keep hearing the word blockchain. I don't get it. What is it and why should I care?
So I fell in love with the idea and the concept of the blockchain a couple of years ago. And I'll explain it this way and then let me know if it kind of is simplified. Have you ever seen the movie Ready Player One?
Yes.
So I guess I'll just quickly go over it for people who might have not. But Ready Player One is a really, really, I think, it's a foundational vision of the blockchain. And what it is, it's a global universe. We're able to jump between different worlds. And in one world, you might buy, this t-shirt. And then when you jump to the next world, you're still wearing that t-shirt. So you almost create a virtual reality where the things that you own move around with you across different locations. And you're able to use them in different locations. So if we look at the metaverse or virtual world as Fortnite and then Call of Duty, what if you're able to buy specific skins or things that when you were playing Call of Duty and you went to Fortnite, they were there? That concept of being able to move the things around across the different games is called interoperability. It's a big word, but it basically means that it's able to be compatible and work across different environments. Right now, when you go on a website, the website is compatible for a mobile phone or for a desktop. And we're reaching a point where websites now need to become compatible for AR and VR. And theoretically, imagine that all the websites you love today, when you put on a VR headset, you're no longer looking at a flat experience, you're walking around that experience. And imagine if when everyone was on that website at the same time, instead of them looking at a flat screen, they were walking around the store together. When you create a world where people are immersed in the internet, you want to have the ability to move around the internet with the things that you love. The blockchain is a global way for people to keep track of what they own and what they love. And I think the core of it all is there's this concept of centralization and decentralization. Centralization is when one entity controls everything. And what I mean by that is if I was under Fortnite's hood, Fortnite was the owner, I could buy my skins, but it's only in Fortnite. If I was in Call of Duty, I could buy my skins, but only in Call of Duty. The blockchain is decentralized. It's on top of all of that. The world's ownership is stored on the blockchain. And now I don't have to worry about Fortnite or Call of Duty. What's up here is what I own, and it goes with me everywhere. So the blockchain really creates the next version of ownership on the internet, where what you own on the internet moves around with you. And when you think about a file on the internet, you're like, I could copy and paste. What does it matter if I own it? If I just copy and paste it, I also have the picture and that guy has the picture. Everyone's like, I just copy and pasted the picture. But it's not actually just about copy and pasting the picture. What if when you went to the website and they said, sorry, you can't get access to this learning course, or sorry, you can't get access, you can't get in, right? You go to the amazing hypebeast store that you love and it's immersive and you get up to the door and it's locked. You can't get in. You can't talk to the people that you love. You can't interact with the fans. You can't interact with the people that have shared interests with you because you can't get in. You know why? Because the blockchain has the recognition of who owns that JPEG, who owns that picture, and only that real owner on the blockchain can get in. Even though you copy and pasted it, you didn't change the owner on the blockchain. And that kind of is going to rule who owns and who is who across a global internet. And I think that's kind of the really, really compelling, right, story and vision of the blockchain.
I have to be so honest with you. I think that was the best way anyone explained blockchain I've ever heard. Like you made that so simple. Wow. Like now I get it. Now I fully understand. I mean, so how far away are we from like pretty much that being completely a norm? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's a lot of amazing use cases that are already there. The most frustrating friction point, I think, has been the concept of actually how to use it, right? So like, where am I storing what I own? What does that even mean to store what I own? And there's been a lot of confusion around that piece of the technology. But we're making real strides in terms of the way that people are able to own things in a secure way and not have to even worry about what that means. But what that really comes down to is you're going to basically start to feel that on the internet, right? So when you get a subscription to a specific website or to a specific thing, or you buy, a collectible, you actually see the benefits of owning it on the internet. And more importantly, you feel the liquidity. When I say liquidity, it means the ability to buy and sell. The beautiful thing around there being a global version of who owns what is now everybody has the freedom of buying and selling what they own on the internet. And when you think about that, it gives it a lot more value to the virtual stuff that you own. You're like, why would I want an NFT? Well, if NFT is giving me all of this access on the internet, I go to all of these websites, experience all of these things, I have all these benefits. Someone else is going to come to you and say, I also want that. And you could sell it to them. And when you feel yourself having the ability to sell a virtual thing that you own, it all of a sudden becomes a lot more real, and ownership is really there. And the moment people start to feel that more without having to worry about all of the friction that has to get them there in the first place, it'll become a lot more fluid. So we're getting there. Websites are integrating them. Large brands are starting to use it, but in ways that you might not even notice. And then your experience on the internet will slowly but surely change, and for the better.
I mean, because yeah, it still feels like it's like kind of in its infancy right now, but it's like eventually it's just gonna all be that, and it seems like very interesting.
Yeah.
That it's actually gonna like get to a point where it's like everything's on the blockchain, like we're all on there, like it's like still not the norm yet, but it sounds like the way things are going, eventually it will be. So it's interesting.
And Apple, is releasing this new headset in a couple months. Meta has had some great updates to their current headsets, and I think it becomes even more tangible when you are in an immersive world where you're interacting with these things that, that you own, right? And then all of a sudden, someone comes into your virtual room and they see all these things that you own, and it's not like they could just click copy and paste into their room. It's just not going to work like that, right? So you'll have the ability to really feel the virtual world in a way where you have things that you care about and that you own and that you've earned, So yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, the way like things are looking now with everything changing with the blockchain and NFT and AI and tech as a whole, pretty much, it seems like ownership as a whole is like changing its meaning entirely soon. Because it's like with AI, at least, I'm sure you're aware with all the AI music that comes out, like AI Drake and The Weekend and stuff like that. So it's like because of that, it's like they're striving to like actually make a federal rule for copyright for like the first time ever, because copyright is normally like a state by state thing. So it's like because of AI and everything, it's like they're starting to make it like actually federal, which is great.
1,000%. And I think you're spot on. Like, it's going to change what we mean by ownership. And I think it also is going to make brands question how, with this emerging technology, they determine ownership. And that's kind of where my next business is headed. It's like all these companies have all these characters, these worlds, these IP, Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, all of these things. And if there are ways to allow other people to build on top of their ownership, there's new monetization methods, there's new business models, there's new ways for communities and brands to create together using these new technologies, AI in particular, and then even use cases for blockchain as well. So yeah.
Yeah, it's all really cool. And honestly, moving on from NFTs from now, this question comes from Jake, and it's a question about your other company that you started, which was Evolv Shorts. What was the inspiration behind that? Because
Yeah, so I was a sneakerhead in high school, and I love, like the hypebeast culture, if you will. So in college, as I started to get more interested in entrepreneurship and building businesses, I was like, let's start my first one in school. And more particularly, this brand, Just Dawn, was a big, like, I think, hypebeast brand where like you saw LeBron with these big shorts with Lakers logo across the front. And I was just like, yo, those are sick, but they cost like $400. So I was like, how could I create a radically reduced version of that's much more affordable, but still like meaningful in quality. So I went ahead to build my first brand of Evolv Shorts, to go ahead and do that. And yeah, found manufacturers overseas, kind of built out the brand, distribution, all that. And then over time, it kind of developed, and it got to a point where I was like, why don't I take the nostalgia and collectability of basketball shoes and try to transform that feeling into a pair of shorts, so that, yeah, I love shoes. I love the idea of having, collectible shoes. But if I could reflect that into a pair of shorts, you have an item that's a lot cheaper to produce, and a lot more affordable. And then you can kind of build a brand and community off of that. And that was kind of where I was going with Evolv.
it's really cool. And I mean, it's interesting because like those shorts, like this type of shorts, like with like the Lakers logo and stuff like that, those like types of shorts had the world on like lock for a
Yeah,
solid few months. Like, and it was during the NBA offseason too. Like everyone
yeah,
was
100%.
shorts, like it was so baller.
Yeah.
But like you're a big sneakerhead. Were you like big into basketball also, or like just like the sneakers?
Yeah, no, I'm big into basketball culture, sports culture, like and NBA, NFL. I love it now, and like I loved it back then. I love it from fantasy perspective. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Who's your NBA team?
So I'm living in Miami. My family's originally from Boston, which means I've grown up very privileged, and it's been quite a blessing in in my life. But yeah, the Boston Celtics, and I'll be honest, they're looking good. They're looking good.
They're
Um,
looking they're looking pretty nice, but honestly, I think the Bucks might take it. They just need like a second to load because it's like they have Dame and Giannis. It's like you can't put everybody on one person because like the other person's gonna have like three chances at the lane. You know, it's like you can't double Dame because Giannis is gonna be open, and you can't double Giannis because Dame's gonna be open. It's like
it's a
crazy.
wild team. I'm excited for them to compete against each other. But yeah, my Celtics, man, like they're looking too good. They're looking good.
Yeah,
They just got so many guys that can put up 20 points. You know what I mean? And yeah, in like a 7 game series, I just think that that's gonna be strong. You know?
that's really interesting. And I mean, honestly, it's like I'm a Rockets fan personally, so I'm just happy we're on a 5 game win streak now. Out of nowhere, apparently Dylan Brooks is good at basketball. I had no idea. Like I was tweeting about it nonstop too. Like every time like someone would say something about Dylan Brooks in Houston, I'd just be like, I don't care, trade him, get him out of here. Like, why are we like we paid 80 mil for him, 4 years of Dylan Brooks, but it's doing well.
Yeah, you'll see how it goes, you know?
Yeah, I mean we beat the Lakers by 30 points too, which is like nuts. Like it's cool.
Listen, man, I feel bad for Lakers. You know what I mean?
It's
Because it's
interesting.
like LeBron's still gonna play, but like I don't know if they got it in them, you know. And their time was a couple of years ago. They got one, but it was like during the bubble, so it's not really like a meaningful win, you know.
I mean, it was like meaningful in a sense because it's like I mean the whole objective that they had to win the chip like was kind of like they kind of did it for Kobe. So it's like
I
it,
guess from that standpoint,
it just ruined a little bit because there wasn't like a crowd. But
yeah. And like
all
LeBron to win with the crowd, that would be crazy, you know.
yeah, it would have been nuts. But it's like it's interesting because like before the season started, everyone was just like, oh, the Lakers look to have a really deep team, like they're looking pretty
Right.
nice. Like overall, like names wise, like based on like just a piece of paper, it looks like a really good team, like a really nice team. But then like 5 games in, and they're just like, all right, trade talks. Who are we giving up? Like who's gone? Like
Right. Exactly.
love doing that. 5 games in, they're just like, all right, we're trading D'Angelo Russell, Gabe Vincent, and a second round pick. And then they just put any star like in a Lakers jersey, like Photoshop, and they're just like, he's coming.
That was literally like all you saw. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like they sometimes they go these photoshops. You actually make it happen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, because it's like they Photoshop everybody. So it's like you're
Yeah.
bound to get one or two right?
Yeah.
Like like someone like said online, it's like if you like Google a player and put Lakers next to the name, you will find a Photoshop jersey on them
Oh, yeah.
every time. Like Gordon Hayward, Laker, boom, it's there. Like
So they have some of those where they Photoshop them with like an NFL jersey on. Some people are like, there's no way he's going to NFL.
yeah. I feel like they probably did that with LeBron like 5 times.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen LeBron in the
Yeah,
with the helmet on, you know?
sure. What do you think of Wemby?
Yeah, I was watching his first couple games. Like he had one game he went off, but yeah, he's gonna be good. Like he's got like that turnaround jumper and like
It's
it's
like
nice.
I feel like in 3 years, like they have to kick him out because it's not going to be fair at all.
Yeah, because he could like dominate. That's those crazy things about these players is like a close game and there's like 6 minutes left or whatever, and they end up winning by 12, you know? And it's just like this guy just took over the game,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's like I look because it's like before the thing like before the season started, like I would talk to a bunch of people and they're just like he's gonna get injured in like a week. He's so skinny. Like he's gonna get like beat up by like an Anthony Davis or a Giannis. But the thing is that people forget he's not like coming out of college. He's coming out of the EuroLeague, which is like another professional league, and probably 20 times more physical than the NBA. So it's like it's interesting. Like he could potentially have a really long career, you
I
know.
hope so. You
Like
know what
I
I mean?
hope so too. It'd be interesting. Like
Yeah. I would
yeah,
love to like meet that guy. Like just to see how tall he is. You know what I mean? Like it's insane.
just me just like
Yeah.
enough about basketball, you know. We can talk enough about that. We could talk about that all day, but we have a few more questions and these questions are kind of more about your mindset slash your future, you know. It's about you personally. So I'm actually really excited about these. So this question comes from Lola. Um, what keeps you creative? Like, how do you come up with these ideas? Like, evolve short, like making shorts like appealable to sneakerheads and making like global fantasy horse racing. Like, how do you come up with these ideas? They're all very creative. How do you stay creative?
I mean, I'm constantly, I think it's a good question. I think sometimes people are more, I say, analytical in nature or more, artistic in nature. At my core, I'm like an artist. I love art. I love creating things. I love colors and just film and stories and all of that type of stuff. So I'm inspired by a lot of the stuff that I see. And I think for me, it's like constantly being inspired by the world, by culture, by all these different aspects of life that I think are manifestations of ideas and stories that you could latch onto and gain meaning for yourself. I think for me, like, yeah, I'm fascinated by stories and brands in particular that tell great stories, and I'm always looking for new things. I'm always inspired by new things. And yeah, I have a tendency to look at things and say, like, wow, is that something that's going to be meaningful or impactful long term? Is this a fad? Is this right? Is this sustainable? There's all these questions when you think about technology, but then when you also think about brands and the vision that they have as a whole. And I think for me, it's like, what's the best story, right? Like, if I could close my eyes and be honest with myself, is my story good enough? Is this story relevant? Is this story going to sell? And the more candid you can be with yourself around your stories, things you believe, the things that you care about, and the things that you're creating, the more compelling the story will be for people that hear them, right? And yeah, I'm just after the best story, I guess. So by constantly consuming things, I tend to appreciate and build off of stories that I love.
Yeah. And I honestly relate to that too, because you know our friend Yoel, our good friend Yoel, shout out to him.
That
A little while ago, I did an episode about myself where like people were able to ask me questions on the show. And Yoel actually asked like, because I'm in law school now, he asked like, does law school like help you connect to your artist side? And the thing is, yeah, I like doing music for fun. I like, you know, doing comedy for fun, things like that. Like I have an artist side to me. I just like I never really connected that to like law school and like my professional life. Even though I'm extremely passionate about it, I never really found like the connection because like I'm very passionate about sports and law. So like I was able to mix those two together. But in regards to the artist side, not so much. So I think it's really cool to see someone who was able to take the artist in them and make it like something successful like you. So it's like it's really cool that you did that. And I'm really happy for you.
appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's just like yeah, it's like I wish I could like, you know, become an entertainment lawyer and like represent myself like in regards to like rap. But the thing is like I know in my heart, like I'm not gonna like go into rap like full time. It's mainly just a hobby to me, you know.
Yeah, it depends. I guess whatever the best story that you have that you want to manifest, you know what I mean? That'll be the one that wins out. So um yeah.
Honestly, it's like I feel like the closest thing I have to creating something creative with me, like combining that with something professional, is this show. Because like on one hand, I started this show to like help in networking and I wanted to like make a podcast for a while. But on the other hand, like posting on YouTube now, it's like it's connecting to my 10-year-old self that would watch all these YouTubers like Ryan Higa and KSI and like all these guys when I was like 10. I was like, wow, I want to be just like them, you know? And now it's like obviously I'm not as big as them, you know. I only have 119 subscribers, so if you're watching this, subscribe, please. But it's like it's small, but it's like the fact that I'm like posting to YouTube like every week and I'm actually doing it. It's like cool. It's like connecting to that 10-year-old self, just like, wow, I'm actually like kind of doing this.
Yeah, there you are doing it. You know what I mean? It's like awesome to like walk the walk. You know what I mean? And then to manifest an idea. So it's creation. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and it's like, listen, we're just two guys who are like actually walking the walk out here. It's pretty rare to see us like actually like joining together. So it's like it's cool.
Yeah, I love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this next question comes from Daniel. Um, where do you see yourself in the future? Like, do you have any goals or cool projects you're working on? So we can talk a little more about post silk, like whatever you're open to sharing, you know?
Yeah. So I think at the core, I'm an entrepreneur. So like I love the freedom of being able to build, my own business and take ideas and bring them to life. So there's a bunch of businesses that I think I get excited about building. Right now, my focus is on a particular venture that I'm starting, which I think is really, really something that not just I think sells, but also it like ticks a box for myself personally around like my impact on the world, or if you will, but what I want to spend time doing. And past several months I kind of wrote down my priority list, I guess, for myself nowadays, right? What are the top things that I actually care about most, right? You could think salary, you could think freedom, you could do all these things, and I created a list, and I want to not like check off the top things on my list fundamentally, and those things will help kind of create a lot of momentum and energy and confidence around the things that I'm doing. And I think this next venture is really focused on storytelling as a concept, right? But at the core, humans as a whole are actually limited by just the things that we could say, right? It's very difficult for me to express a deep, intricate experience that I had, or immense pain or immense happiness in the context of my life through words alone. And when you look at amazing films, right, or video shorts, or content that was produced in a really high quality format with sound and all these things, you could tap into a feeling in a way that words couldn't do that for you. And I think we're reaching a point right now where, with the advancements that's coming along with generative image creation and generative AI as a whole, and then also, from the ownership side, where brands are coming along and where communities with ideas, with stories, with those brands, how they can kind of collectively use this new advancements of technology to build on top of the stories that already exist. And I'm excited about creating a platform that allows people to use the characters, the worlds, and the things they love to storytell, and have almost an augmentation, an assistant that helps them from a creative standpoint to tell their stories, but in a way where they compete and rival with the quality standards of traditional TV shows or movies. And the Netflix of the future is not going to be one that's created by production studios or media companies, but by communities and fans. And we've seen major amounts of fan fiction that are created around stories and books and comics and all these things. And we've seen from the Web3 standpoint, right, early communities that have major fan fiction, a fandom around, characters and worlds that are not even built yet. And if you can empower them to create together, all of a sudden you have a really, really powerful, I'd say, platform for storytelling. And that's kind of what I'm focused on building next.
Yeah. So I mean, honestly, it's like I'm still a little bit kind of confused about it. Like, I understand that it's a thing about storytelling for like these companies and things like that. Everyone has a story to tell. How does AI like how is AI involved in that?
So AI, there's like a lot, AI is a buzzword, I think, and it kind of encapsulates a lot of different things. And there's different types of machine learning models, if you will, but they're basically trained to do specific things really, really well. And if you could train, let's say a model, for example, to be able to replicate the look and feel of Spider-Man, and then you give a fan the ability to tell a story of Spider-Man, and the model's able to replicate the story in a quality standard that rivals that of what the production Spider-Man company produces, all of a sudden the fan fiction that fans start to create, they're no longer just words that someone's typing or small sketches that they're drawing. I just created my own series about Spider-Man that could be a derivative story, and it could be a filler story, right? These are not canon. They're not the main stories, but they're alternative plot lines that fans want to create. And the exciting thing about this technology, right, AI as a whole, is that you're giving someone the ability now to produce really, really high quality content without them having to be, right, without them having to have an entire team behind them or have the skill sets themselves. They just need to have the ideas. And then they need to be able to express those ideas in ways where the technology can output them. And I'm working on building a platform that will allow anyone's ideas to come to life in ways that make them feel like a superstar producer, right, or director. And that's the focus. And then all of a sudden, if you're able to do that, it's no longer about which production company's producing new movies. You'll start to see brands, whether they're influencer based or whether they're small brands or small communities, start to produce content that has either small adoption, but adoption that they could then scale to their friends and their other audiences that are out there. And I envision that a lot of these TV shows of the future are not just created by, Netflix or all these companies, but Logan Paul will have his own TV show, right? If all these people are able to create their own shows using technology, that makes it easy to the modern day person without a lot of money. And that's what I'm working on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it totally does. And it's actually really cool because, like, at least for example, for me, I'm a really big Spider-Man fan personally. Like, I've grown up on like watching Spider-Man, reading the comics, all that stuff. And I know that there's so many different stories that you can tell about Spider-Man because there's so many comics about it. Like, there's so many different alternate storylines and things like that. And instead of pretty much like splitting a company too thin so that everyone can work on like a different storyline for Spider-Man to make a new series or anything like that, it's like you can focus all your firepower on like the big things, which would help like the quality of like movies as a whole, because Hollywood kind of has gone a little bit down in quality, to be 100% honest. Like, so it would go back to focusing all the firepower on Hollywood and the big releases and things like that, while keeping the fans happy with like consistent content of like different and interesting things. So it's a really cool idea. It's really great. And I'm happy.
And from the Web3 side, if you will, I was mentioning like there's all these ideas or all these characters that were released, but the company never did anything with them. The really interesting thing about Web3 is there are a bunch of really compelling, I'd say, communities around specific characters and lore that are in their infancy. It's like the Star Wars of the future, but hasn't been created yet. You know what I mean? And there's a bunch of them. And if you can equip their community, right, of 2,000, 3,000 people to be able to create their stories in a really high quality format, they have the ability now to create their own series, their own worlds. And now people could really start to appreciate them in a whole new way. And it allows the IP that's just an idea to grow. And it equips not just the business, but their community of enthusiasts to support its growth. And that's a whole new business model from an ownership side we're talking about, where it's not only up to the big companies to promote it and to get into theaters and do all of that. You have the ability now to have your own fans build on top of it and promote it as well. And when you think about the strength of not just a business, but a community on top of that, you talk about major opportunities to create an incentive structure that empowers the business and the community, the fans, the viewers in a whole new way that never existed. And that's something I'm really excited about.
The way the show works is the first question always comes from me, and the last question also always comes from me. And that's, if you had to pick one piece of advice that you want to give the fans before we head out, what would you say?
I would say that at the core of everything, confidence is key. And how do you build confidence for yourself and create a reality that empowers you on a daily basis to dream big and go after what you want, and to feel a sense of strength and positivity in your daily life? I think it comes down to just focusing on, right, what enters your mind and what goes out of your mouth, and creating a reality for yourself, the people you surround yourself with, the things that you focus on, right, the ideas that you let ponder in your mind. There's so many different variables in this world and so much noise, and being able to focus on things that empower you, build confidence, and allow you to achieve great things over time, I think is at its core. So yeah, focus on the noise and what you let in, and be really, really thoughtful around building a reality that empowers you on a daily basis.
Yeah, confidence is key, ladies and gentlemen. Benny, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you. If you guys like this episode, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're interested to see like what's going on with the show, if you want to ask questions for the next guest, things like that, make sure to follow the socials. All the links are going to be down below. If you're interested to see what's Binny got going on, I'm going to add his links to the description too. And on that note, this has been the USB podcast. This has been Binny Plotkin. My name is Ed in Toronto, and I'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.